Hello, friends. We're here on a very special episode. It is the 50th episode of the Divorce Broadcast, and we have some esteemed guests today, starting with the one, the only, the living legend, Craig M. Dorn, business law attorney, and our in-house friend of the show, Miss Irech Colon Morales, coming in all the way from Orlando. And we're going to call this episode Taking Care of Business when the business interest gets involved in the divorce proceedings. Welcome back to the Divorce Broadcast. My name is Manny Segarra, coming to you from Miami, Florida. Mr. Craig Dorn, why don't you tell everybody a little bit about what you do, sir?
It's my pleasure to be on the broadcast. When I heard it was going to be the 50th episode, I said I had to attend. My name is Craig Dorn. I'm born and raised here in Miami. I'm a proud graduate of the University of Miami School of Law.
Yes.
And I'm also an adjunct faculty member for the University of Miami as well.
Wonderful, sir. And in terms of your legal area of expertise, what area do you practice in?
I am what's commonly called a corporate lawyer, or also called a business lawyer. What I do is I help companies get formed, as well as representing all kinds of people in any kind of contractual type of matter they may have. I mean, whether it be a non-disclosure agreement, a shareholder agreement, you want to buy or sell something, that's what I do. I love to sit down and put words on a page and help people really understand what those words mean, so they don't get caught with just signing on the bottom line without truly understanding what it is that they are signing.
How does that differ from those attorneys that they call litigators?
It's my job not to go to the courthouse. It's my job to help you make sure that you can avoid the courthouse.
Oh, that sounds good. Also on the show is our resident superstar family attorney, Miss Irech Colon Morales. What is going on in your world, ma'am?
Thank you so much for having me again. I am currently working from Orlando. We have expanded here. And one of the things that I do a lot is divorce. We do a stretch of family law cases, anything regarding domestic issues between family, involving children, etc.
All right. So one of the topics that you and I discussed before we got on the show, Irech, was maybe talking about when businesses are involved in divorce proceedings. Why do you think that may be a relevant or germane topic?
So one of the things that we have to consider when you're entering into the divorce lawsuit, or maybe we're taking over a divorce lawsuit that's already started, we have to consider what are the assets and the liabilities in this divorce. And a business is one of the most common assets that can arrive. What are we going to do with this business? And this is divorce.
Good stuff. So if you are talking about divorces and business, who better to ask than the gentleman that we have on the show today, right?
Exactly.
So, Mr. Craig Dorn, what are the different types of businesses that people may consider opening when they go into partnerships or businesses with their friends or family or things like that?
Well, there's a ton of different types of businesses are out there. We go back to the old days, we would start with what was called a sole proprietorship, which is not really a separate business. It's really where the person just opens up their store or whatever else it is, and they're just operating where they do not have that being separate from what the assets are of the person themselves. That to me is what I would call the worst situation you can ever do, because if anything ever goes wrong, you're getting sued personally for everything, because it's really just you as operating as the business. The C Corp really is for the, I'll call the mega companies, whether you want to sit down and own your shares of Disney, or whether you want to own your shares of General Motors, because those really should be mostly the publicly traded companies. What we commonly have is what's called a S Corp, or a small business corp. It's where a corporation makes that small business election with the IRS. You file a simple form, and now the profits or the losses of that business get that reflected on that person's individual tax return. We avoid what's called double taxation. I know that would scare everybody out there. Why would somebody want to pay double taxes? C Corp, the corporation pays taxes, and then they give the corporation, when it gives you money, you pay taxes on it again. I tried to make sure my clients can avoid that at all costs.
That sounds pretty smart.
The newest and the latest, although it's really not that new, is what's called a limited liability company. It's kind of like what we'd call an S Corp, because the profits and losses really go to the individual's tax return, but it gives the ability to have something a little bit more diversified. Because if you're a S Corp, the people that own it have to truly be people. They have to be individuals. But an LLC can be made up where you have different businesses that own it. And guess what? We can avoid double taxation again. I again would try to sit down and convince people not to form an LLC as a single member. I would try to get you to an S Corp, because it gives you more protection. Again, don't let the words limited liability company make you think that you're more protected. No, you would actually be less protected with a single member LLC than a single owner of an S corp.
Good stuff. So that is a great 360-degree view of the different types of corporations. You could probably teach a class on that. I know you took a law school course on.
Yes, I did. It was painful.
It sounds like Craig figured it out in about 2 minutes. So kudos to him.
Kudos.
All right. So
It helps that I've been doing this for over 30 years.
You can't tell,
relate.
my friend.
Can't relate.
So now that people may have decided to form one of these types of businesses, what are some of the protocols that you need to follow when you have a business with somebody?
Well, if you have a business, the best thing you can really have would be some kind of an agreement amongst the owners. Now, if you're in a corporation setting, you would have what's called a shareholder agreement, where we can define everybody's rights and obligations inside of the company. It makes it much more clean and decisive. If you have a limited liability company, you don't have a shareholder agreement because you don't have shareholders. You have members, which are the owners. Then we have what's called an operating agreement. Again, we define what everybody's rights are and what everybody's obligations are to try to avoid those type of disputes. And you can be very specific.
So it sets up the framework. I get it. Question to you, Craig. Do you oftentimes see when businesses are created and they don't have these initial documents in order?
Amazingly, I would say probably 75% of the businesses that are out there really do not have an agreement amongst the co-owners of the business.
That's unfortunate.
Such a waste that they didn't get that in place to begin with. So talk to me about, is there any annual requirements when you have a business with somebody?
You would be amazed at how many businesses get what's called administratively dissolved. That means that the state says you no longer exist because you didn't pay your fee to the state. You don't form the business once and it exists forever. You actually have to file a report with the Secretary of State. And if you pay that fee, the company goes on. If you don't pay that fee, it gets to be administratively dissolved.
So make sure that you pay your annual fee. What about in terms of internally?
Every corporation or every limited liability company should have what's called an annual meeting at a minimum. You get together, you discuss the basic things about the business. One, you reappoint the officers or managers of the business, depending upon how that business is set up. You sit down and review the financials of that business, or you can sit down and say, no, we've already seen it, we waived it. But it's just basic minimum formalities that need to go into a business. And if you maintain those, along with a couple other things, like maybe having a standard insurance policy and making sure that you don't treat the business as your own personal piggy bank, then you can sit down and hopefully avoid having what's called piercing the corporate veil, where you're subjecting yourself to personal liability for not maintaining the formalities of a business.
Understood. So do you have a pro tip for the audience in terms of how to make sure that they're keeping their yearly minutes as well as their annual meetings?
If you have the agreement actually says when you're supposed to have your annual meeting. If you also sit down and do something like hire a professional registered agent, may also help you maintain the formalities of the business and also avoid having somebody knock on your door saying you're being sued when you may not even be being sued. They may want your medical records. There are ways you can sit down and do that by hiring either an attorney, or there's some services that are out there that can sit down and act as your registered agent to help you avoid some of those sticky situations.
So as we move on, let's talk about some of the more likely causes of business disputes between the partners.
The most common issue is one partner taking out more money out of the business than the other partner, or where one person's supposed to be the operating person of the business, the other person's supposed to be providing the cash. Those cause issues. You don't have a budget for how that business is supposed to operate, or you don't have that written agreement that I talked about that says, how can we sit down and do it? Well, a minority partner, meaning somebody that owns less than the other, may not have any protections from that, where the other owner of the business that owns more than you votes to increase their pay every single year. Well, if you don't have the agreement, you may end up being diluted, meaning your percentage of ownership keeps getting reduced, or you may sit down and say, I'm not putting the money in, and then you end up into court.
So financial mismanagement, some cash flow issues too.
Yep. And another one, which I didn't talk about, another common type of business is what we call a professional association or a professional limited liability company. Realize that people that own that business need to have a certain type of license. Make sure you understand who can and who cannot own the business depending upon that type of business that you form.
That's why some of the cryptocurrency cryptocurrency exchanges are getting in trouble because they're making financial transactions and they don't have necessarily
the appropriate license to conduct that type of business. These type of businesses do deal with securities laws. So you do want to sit down and have an understanding of basic securities law, which is why you really shouldn't just go online and maybe necessarily form your own company. Maybe hire an attorney that's got some experience to help you do things the right way.
Makes a lot of sense. So we've talked about mismanagement, we've talked about cash flow issues, and now I guess we're getting to some of the other good stuff, which is the reason for the podcast today as well, the joint reason, and that would be spouses. How do spouses affect businesses, Craig?
Well, one of the most common one is one of the owners of the business decides to have his or her spouse come in and start working inside of the business. So the question is, how is that ownership in that business being taken? Is it by the individual, by the couple? If one of the owners passes away, does it go to the spouse?
Is there something that you as a practice do when you find out that someone might be engaged and about to start a business with somebody?
I'll talk about one of my favorite clients I had years ago, where we had 3 young individuals that came to me. The parents decided that they're going to help them start their own company. These were 3 childhood friends, and mom and dad started each of them out with $250,000 to start the business.
Wow.
Me, I have a habit of being a little bit of a sarcastic individual, like to stir a little bit of trouble on occasion.
No way.
I ask the question and say, well, you all graduated college. I'm sure at least one of you is in a relationship that's moderately serious. And I can see 2 of them look at the other one. And I asked the question and said, well, I hate to say it this way, but there's a 50% chance that this person right now will get married and end up in a divorce.
Correct.
How would you feel if he or she gets divorced and now the spouse of that person ends up now owning a percentage of your business? And let's just say that the facial expression on the other 2 turned rather green. I said, how about we put into the agreement amongst the 3 of you a requirement for a prenuptial agreement? And needless to say, the person was able to sit down and now get a prenuptial agreement saying, honey, I love you, but I am required to do this in order for me to continue to be partners with my partners.
Yes, ultimate protection for the business and more palatable for the spouse.
Now, there is another way, which can also be done if you're already married, where we can have like a spousal waiver.
Good. All right. So we're going to pivot a little bit. Now we're going to start talking to our family law superstar here, Ms. Irech Colón-Morales. So what happens when divorces contain or a business becomes part of a divorce?
Yes. The first question is there a business? Does it exist? Is it at issue? So one of the things that we like to do is something very basic. The Department of State does have a Division of Corporations website called sunbiz.org for short in Florida. And you can go onto that website. And what we do is we'll search up the name of the spouses, figure out, is there a company, and find out if there's a business that has been created either during the marriage or even before the marriage. So that's the first step. And after that is figuring out, how do I serve this business?
When it comes to business, there's a different service requirement than when it comes to individuals?
Correct. Craig did mention it very briefly, but a registered agent is always designated on Sunbiz. And this is the person that you should serve the business with, or you can also serve an officer of that business. So even if, let's say, the spouse is in his individual capacity, the wife or the husband, and they also are the owner of the company, you would have to serve that person in 2 different capacities. One as the designated corporate owner or corporate defendant, and the other would be in his or her individual capacity as the spouse in the divorce.
Great information. So here's the $64,000 question. How do we know if a business is marital or non-marital? What are some of the cues that you may look at?
So that's always the most difficult question that we are confronted with, because there is no clear-cut answer.
But I feel like every time we represent the business owner, they're like, no, there's no marital component. And then every time we represent the
other
spouse
side.
who's not the business owner, is like, yes, there definitely is.
Yes, of course. So the first thing I had mentioned is looking at when the business was created. So there is a presumption that if the business was created during the marriage, that it'll be a marital asset, meaning that it has to be divided in the divorce. The other thing that you can look at, whether the non-business owning spouse helped the other spouse in the business, maybe assisted with administrative items. Maybe they did a lot of the customer service, or even one of the bigger things is, what if your company is being run out of your home where everything starts to get a little commingled? Who's paying the electricity, the business or the personal checking accounts? So there's different things to look at. And one of the bigger issues that does make it, in our argument, when it's convenient, that makes it marital, is when there is a commingling of funds, as I said, where the business and the personal finances have no specific separate division. It's very hard to ascertain how you can determine what is what, which is what Craig was saying earlier, and piercing that corporate veil makes a huge difference in divorce cases.
Also, I think it's important to go back and look at the history, because some people think I just go on to Sunbiz, I make a change, my name doesn't appear. Well, realize you can go back and you can look at the history to see what was it like last week or the year before or the year before that. So.
That's a great point. What about the example where you have a spouse who doesn't necessarily put like money into the business, but helps support the business owner, like a homemaker who kind of has what we like to call like sweat equity? Is there an argument for that person as well, or are they lost at sea?
Most definitely. And oftentimes and not, that is the situation where you have one spouse that is that primary breadwinner. And then you have the other spouse, whether wife or husband, who stays at home with the kids and does the dinners and the groceries and takes care of the home. Well, there's an argument to say that without that spouse's contribution and maintaining the home, then the business owner wouldn't have the opportunity to succeed in his business.
All right, next big ticket item, which is always a fight, depending upon which side you're on, the valuation of the business. How does that work?
Yeah, so very often when there is a business, a very smart thing to do is to obtain a forensic accountant. We are not tax experts, we're not valuation experts, but one of the things that we will do in order to assist us is we will retain the services of a forensic accountant to be able to help us determine what is this business worth. We'll look at the assets that the business has, we'll look at the liabilities that the business has and determine what is the actual equity in the business. We'll also look at the inventory in order to figure out what's the percentage share for each spouse.
Right, that's a great point. And I think there's also a part of it that's called goodwill, which is the name and reputation of the company as well.
Yes, correct. So it forms a question of, if this person was no longer part of the business, would it still be worth the same?
Sounds good. All right, wrapping up, the last area that we're going to talk about is the distribution of the business asset. What are some of the usual options that are thrown out there to try to settle cases when a business is involved, Rich?
Yeah, so more oftentimes there's about 3 different types of options. So the first one is just selling the business. You sell it and you determine how it's going to be split. Maybe it's 50-50, maybe it's 60-40, but that's the option.
That sounds like the cleanest option.
It is the cleanest option. It's a good break. You don't look back and you start anew.
But it seems like people don't like the cleanest option as much.
They don't. You know what? They grow an attachment to their business, and a lot of times they like to say, it's mine and I don't want to start again. So they like to make things difficult. So we move on to another option. And another option is they decide to work together. Well, we always tell our clients it's never a good idea to work with your ex-spouses.
Cut ties as much as possible, right?
Yeah, when you have that tie, you're going to have more of a headache than anything. So that option is not often recommended. And then the third option is maybe a person will buy the other out. So once a value is determined, there is a percentage that we will say, all right, I'll leave, but you need to pay me this amount of money.
Which could be paid currently or with future income and things like that, right?
Correct. It could be a lump sum. So they give you a large amount up front, or maybe they decide to pay you in periodic payments.
All right. So great stuff, both of you. Craig, do you want to tell the audience out there anything that you currently have on the horizon that you may want the people to check out?
I think the most important part is really having an understanding, because I put together, like a better way of saying it, shareholder and operating agreements for 2 divorced spouses to continue to work together. I can sit down and say, I believe only once or twice did it actually work out the way that it was planned. If you're going to try to do that, I think it's very important to make sure that you have a business law attorney put together together that agreement, because with all due respect to the divorce attorneys out there, we understand that those issues and how they exist a little bit better. So have us participate in that mediation process when you're working on it.
Well, you know that you're the go-to guy for us. So we always try to get you in on the cases, especially on the ground floor when there's businesses involved. So where can everyone reach you if they want to schedule a consultation?
If they
regarding
want to
any-
reach me, they can schedule in person or a virtual meeting with me. You can reach my office at 305-531-7890, or they can email me at cdorn@dornlaw.com.
Thank you. And Rich, what about you? What's on the horizon for you?
You know, we have a couple of hearings coming up.
Just a few. You've been keeping
Yeah.
busy out there, huh?
Yes, thankfully, you know, we've been able to close a couple cases, so everything's pretty good.
Keep pushing through. All right. Well, thank you both for coming on the channel. It's always a pleasure. And I hope
Thank
that
you for having me.
everyone enjoyed the information that we received. If you are dealing with a divorce case that involves a business dispute, please feel free to reach out to us at www.cigarlawfirm.com. We have offices in Miami, Florida, and Irech over there in Orlando, Florida. Se habla español. And if you like this video, hit the like button and please feel free to subscribe to the Divorce Broadcast. Thank you all for tuning in to our 50th episode. We had an awesome show today with some really great guests. Thank you.